Good to have each of you here this evening. Everybody, hopefully, wants to reach their potential. You want to be the best you can be, do the most you can, and things like that, hopefully. But reaching our potential requires paying a price. There is a price to be paid if we're going to reach that, and paying the price requires commitment. You've probably heard before the story of the hen and the pig. Why the hen and the pig were walking alongside one another in the countryside, I have no idea. But they came across a half-starved traveler, and after pondering for a moment, the hen, whose name was Henrietta, the hen suggested to the pig how nice it would be if they provided the stranger with ham or bacon and eggs. And of course, that sounds like a great idea, but the pig replied, "Henrietta, that may seem like a small sacrifice to you, but for me, that's total commitment." And that just kind of highlights that there's a price to be paid whenever we're going to reach our potential. And as Christians, if we're going to reach our potential, it does require total commitment. There isn't halfway measures. It is something we have to take seriously, and there certainly is a price to be paid. So we're going to talk about that tonight in our study and focus on that this evening. The price that we pay to reach our potential is really more important than the talent that we have. You know, whether you're a king or a peasant, whether you're talented or not, reaching your potential is going to be costly. It doesn't matter your position or your ability, it's going to be costly if you're going to reach that potential. Our scripture reading tonight was from 2 Chronicles 31, talking about King Hezekiah. Those two verses have a lot in there about him doing what was good and doing what was right. And he was true before the Lord his God. It says, in every work that he began, he did it with all of his heart. And so when we think about Hezekiah, usually it's just kind of like, that's great. I mean, great job. You know, he did really good and a lot of things were accomplished. But I want us to think about for just a moment on this particular point, you know, the price that he really had to pay. There was a lot of sacrifice involved in what he did. Think about the lifestyle that he would have had to have changed. He couldn't just live the way that his father had, whose name was Ahaz. He couldn't just do the things that his father did because his father didn't do the things that were right. He paid a price of loneliness, as it would have been such a challenge. He would have paid a price in having to step out and being obedient to God, something that was not real common in that time. And certainly, at least in the beginning, he would have been alone, as a lot of the reforms that he was making would not have been popular, and he would have been ostracized in that regard in a lot of ways. But Hezekiah had faith in God, and he believed that God would bless his efforts. He would have faced a lot of criticism. He would have had to weather the harsh questions of the older generation before him that would have been wondering why he was doing all that and what changes he thought that he needed to make and why and all of that. And he would have had to have worked hard. He would have had to given up a lot of resources and money and things like that. We might think, well, he's a king, no big deal. But that's, of course, not the way that it would have been. There was a lot of other things he could have been doing. But do you think all of these reforms would have been cheap to make? No, it would have been an expensive endeavor, not only in doing it, but seeking it out and having that kind of attitude of heart to do that, to give up the time, to give up the resources and the energy in order to reach that goal. And so I don't know that we think about that all that much, the price that he would have had to have paid, but he certainly did. And he would have had to have disciplined himself constantly to make sure that he was bringing about those reforms, that it wasn't just words, but it was actions. He would have faced constant pressure in doing those things. And yet he endured that, went through all of that, and all those potential failures and problems and misunderstandings and all of that, to the extent that verses 30 and 31 are there, that he did what was good and right and true before the Lord his God. And in every work that he began, he did it with all his heart. That's a big statement to think about. But just to consider that is important for us, reaching our potential, seeing that the price that needs to be paid in order for that to be brought about. Those who are willing to pay the price will be criticized by those who are not willing. That's a pretty sobering thing to think about. And like it says there on that meme on the screen there, you're not going to be criticized by those that are doing more than you. You'll be criticized by those that are doing less than you. But one of the great tests of paying the price is how we handle criticism. And I want us to look at Nehemiah chapter 4 for a moment tonight. Nehemiah is such a great example. But when you think about facing opposition, facing criticism, and things like that, may not be a better person to talk about than Nehemiah. In chapter 4, we find Nehemiah facing ridicule. The first 3 verses of chapter 4, where it talks about Tobiah, the Ammonite, talks about Sanballat, and as the Jews are rebuilding the wall, they're furious. They're very angry. They're mocking the Jews. They're ridiculing them. What are these feeble Jews doing? Are they going to restore it for themselves? Can they offer sacrifices? Can they finish in a day? Can they revive the stones from the dusty rubble, even the burned ones? And then Tobiah said, even if a fox should jump on it, we would break the stone wall down. You can just imagine that. Ha, ha, ha. How funny is that? As they're ridiculing these things that Nehemiah is facing and all of that. They're the opposition. These people are not helping. They are ridiculing. They are offering resistance. Verses 7 and 8, the repairs continue on. The breaches begin to be closed. Verse 8, all of them conspired together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to cause a disturbance in it. So they're not only ridiculing, they're offering resistance to those things. And along with that, they start rumors. They circulate rumors around. Verses 11 and 12, our enemies said, they will not know or see until we come among them, kill them, and put a stop to the work. And it came about when the Jews who lived near them came and told us 10 times, they will come up against us from every place where you may turn. So they start spreading these rumors. We're gonna stop this. We're gonna come in there and kill them. And you can just imagine the rumor mill going and how that would affect you if you were there trying to do this great work. So think about facing that kind of opposition, ridicule, resistance, rumor. And yet when we see the response of Nehemiah to these things, how he reacts to these different challenges is really an amazing lesson in and of itself. First of all, he relies upon God. In verses 4 and 5, after this ridicule from the first 3 verses 4 and 5, hear, O our God, how we are despised. Return their reproach on their own heads, and give them up for plunder in a land of captivity. And so the point is, we see Nehemiah's response is he relies on God. That is his reaction to ridicule and all these problems that he's facing. Rely upon God. And you might say he even respected the opposition in the perspective of taking it seriously. He took the things that were said in verses 7 and 8, and then if you look at verse 9, but we prayed to our God, and because of them we set up a guard against them day and night. You're going to do all this. He respected that enough to do something about it, praying to God and then setting up a guard against that. And then also he reinforced his weak points. You're going to make accusations. You're going to threaten and have all these rumors about coming to kill us. Well, in verse 13, I stationed men in the lowest parts of the space between the wall, the exposed places. I stationed the people in families with their swords, spears, and bows. And so he reinforces those weak spots. And he goes through, as you read the rest of the chapter, he goes through and he reinforces not only the weak points there, but he also reassures the people in telling them not to be afraid and telling them that God was going to be with them. Additionally, he refuses to quit. He continues to renew the strength of the people. And what we find here is not only are they praying to God about it, but they are doing their building with their sword at their side, and also saying things like, our God will fight for us, and yet they are prepared. They even bring in their weapons even to the watering place, and because they were not going to be deterred from their mission. So think about that and that kind of criticism, that kind of environment, and yet Nehemiah continues on. Chapter 4 of Nehemiah talks about addressing those problems from those on the outside. Chapter 5 deals a lot with those on the inside, problems with disputes about food and taxes and property. But what we see here is the persistence. The criticism was just that. It was made by those that were not helping, not trying to do anything, but trying to hinder. And persistence was the ultimate gauge of their commitment. And they were persistent in what they were doing. And that's really the secret here, is he outlasts the critics. He outlasts those that are trying to do him in, and never wavered in his purpose. So certainly important for us to think about being willing to go through the criticisms in order to accomplish what needs to be done. If we're going to reach our potential, that's what it's going to take. The price we're willing to pay to reach our potential isn't going to decrease. That may seem like kind of a downer. You'd like to think, okay, you get through it and then it's just kind of clear sailing, but it's not really the way that it works, right? For this particular point, think about the man Jehu, who was a king of Israel, 2 Kings chapter 10. He accepted the charge from God to be king. In many ways, he did a lot of good things. He embraced the instructions of God to basically wipe out the house of Ahab and also the worship of Baal. God had told him not to spare anybody in Ahab's family and to eliminate all traces of Baal in worship in the nation of Israel. And we find Jehu doing just tremendous things, fulfilling God's commands, even to the point that God commends him on carrying out that mission, even promising him great blessings. And because of his obedience, those things were said and stated there. But eventually there's a problem that arises. And even though he had obeyed God's command in regard to Ahab and his family, with the worship of Baal, there was some things that were lacking there. He compromised his devotion to God by leaving some of the idols. And in that passage, we're told that the golden calves that Jeroboam had built in Dan and in Bethel, he left those. And the text even says in verse 31 of 2 Kings 10 that Jehu was not careful to walk in the law of the Lord of Israel with all his heart. So even though he had done great things and accomplished great things for God in many ways, still at the end, we come away with him not doing what he was supposed to do, not walking in the way of the Lord carefully, not with all of his heart. And so at the end of all of this, his disobedience overshadows his accomplishments. But it definitely goes to the point to get us to think about it. As he's doing all these great things, it doesn't just go on where you're not having to put any effort into it anymore. He was going to have to continue to press on and continue to pay that price to reach that goal, to reach that potential, but he wasn't willing to do that. It didn't become less. It became something that had to continue, and he wasn't willing to do that. And of course, that's kind of the end result of all that, is things do not go well then at that point. But for you and I, that's a pretty serious thing to think about. Not only being willing to pay the price, but recognizing that the price is going to be high. It's going to be high, and it's not going to go down. We're going to have to stay on our guard and understand that it's going to be a serious thing, that it's not going to decrease, but rather we have to be up on things to continue to follow what the Lord says. If we're going to reach our potential, we're not going to be able to put it on cruise control and just let it go. We're going to have to take those things seriously and recognize what's at stake. Even though Jehu did a lot of good, he still didn't do all that he was supposed to do. And of course, that ultimately was his downfall. In fact, the price that we pay increases whenever we desire to change or improve. If we're going to keep on improving and keep on doing better, then it's going to get to be an increase in what it is that we are paying. The Apostle Paul, of course, is a great example with that, because even though Paul, did so much and accomplished so much, we don't see Paul saying, "Look, I've been through all this, and now it's kind of I'm on easy street." He's not that way at all. Instead, we find him, like in 1 Corinthians 9, talking about how he's running in such a way as not without aim. I box in such a way as not beating the air. I buffet my body and make it my slave, lest possibly after I've preached to others, I myself should be disqualified. Paul kept at it. He kept pressing, kept going, and understood what was at stake, and knew that he could not let up. And he didn't just put it on coast. He had to continue on and continue to press, because nothing about Paul suggested that he thought it was all in the bag and that it was done and it was over. He continues to press forward, continues to press towards that prize, as Philippians chapter 3 talks about. And so that's a pretty important thing for you and I to think about. We live in a society that is a little bit wishy-washy on where they're going to arrive for a destination. And people want to arrive at the right place, but then you just want to stop. I want to arrive, and then I just want to retire. I don't really want to have to do any more than that. And we want something that's going to be a quick fix. But what we really need is the desire to keep going. And if we're looking for a quick fix to stop doing what is right, then that's going to be a terrible thing. And if we want to stop doing what's right, then when we get to where we think we need to be, we just stop. And when that pressure is removed, we're just going to stop. But we have to keep on going, just as we see with Paul. We see some things about people that want to improve themselves. They do some things pretty well. First of all, they make preparations. When people are intentional about learning, intentional about their actions, maybe you want to learn something every day. Maybe you want to become better prepared for something. Well, you have to work at that to be better prepared to handle whatever challenges are going to come your way. Because when the opportunity comes, it's too late to start then. How often have you run into somebody and there's some topic, some conversation that needs to be had, but you're not really ready for it. And you're like, oh, well, I got to figure this out. I need to study. I need to, to figure out what the answer is to this. And that's certainly, maybe the case, but you can't just wait until something comes up to start preparing, or wait till something comes up to start making some sort of preparations. If you wait until you need the info, then you're going to be kind of behind on that. So we need to be making preparations. Obviously, you're not going to have every answer to every question, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to be working to have answers and to improve our faith and knowledge and understanding in all things. But if we're constantly trying to improve ourselves, then of course we're going to be making those kinds of preparations. We're going to spend time in contemplation, thinking about the Word of God, thinking about those things that are important, gaining a perspective of who we are and why it is we're doing the things that we're doing, what successes we've had, what failures we've had, what we can learn from all of that. If we take the time to do some of that, it will help us as we seek to do better. It will enable us to be able to plan better for how we can improve. After all, that's kind of what it's about, right? We want to press on and continue and grow. And yeah, we got to continue to pay a price for that as we want to to continue to increase and improve in our life. And then, of course, there has to be application that's made as we make those kinds of thoughts and progresses. Then we, of course, apply those in our lives. Whatever we fail to do today, we're not really going to be able to make up tomorrow, because then whatever comes tomorrow, we're trying to make up for the past. And so as it's often easy to procrastinate, if we have a failure today, it's going to be something we don't really need to do. I read an interesting thing the other day that said that we often exaggerate yesterday, we overestimate tomorrow, and we underestimate today. And that is probably very true. We think back on yesterday and all the exaggerated things. We overestimate tomorrow, and yet today we think, no big deal. I'll do it tomorrow, right? We can think about it that way. But if we're going to accomplish great things for God, of course, there's going to be a price that has to be paid. And as we think about the Apostle Paul, that is a high price that he had to pay. Even though he accomplished so much good, even though he did so many things for the cause of Christ, you think about what he had to pay for all of that. His story, his journey, and his life was fraught with a lot of difficulties. Even those that obeyed the gospel because of him, he was often judged by them, often condemned by them, became a spectacle of others. He talks about himself as being a fool for Christ, one who was weak and without honor. They viewed him as not honorable, as he talks about himself being hungry and thirsty and poorly clothed and roughly treated, often homeless, toiling with his own hands, persecuted, slandered, even calls himself the scum of the world as he's viewed by others. That's a lot of that in 1 Corinthians chapter 4. But that's a lot. That's a lot to think about. And with all that he accomplished, we think, well, it should have been easier, or should have been better. But it wasn't. And he continually went through that, continually was willing to pay that price so that the gospel could be spread, so that his potential could be furthered, and the cause of Christ, of course, be spread and God be glorified. But I just want us to think about that and consider for ourselves all of those things, because it is a pretty serious matter. And so as we close tonight, think about the price that we're willing to pay. Are we willing to pay it? Knowing what's at stake, knowing what may be required of us. And we should especially be thankful for those that are. We should be thankful for those willing to pay the price, and be sure that we want to keep those people in our lives, because that's who we need to be close to. People that we can count on, people that have gone through difficulties. We need them desperately as our friends, and as people that we can count on, that we can lean on one another. But as we think about reaching our own potential, there's a rocky road there and difficulties. But as we desire to do that for the Lord, then we understand that he is going to be with us. He's going to help us. There's going to be problems in this world, but it's certainly one that we have to be willing to accept. Tonight, as we think about our own life, understand the greatness of serving the Lord, understand how he desires us to be there with him. And he's told us he's not going to leave us. He's not going to forsake us. We are his people, and he desires to be there for us and wants to spend eternity with us. He's made all that possible through Jesus Christ. He sent Jesus to this earth. Jesus lived and he died on this earth so that we can have forgiveness, that we can be in a relationship with him and look forward to eternity. Tonight, if your life is not right with the Lord, we hope that you'll take advantage of the invitation this evening to be right in his side. If we can help in any way, please let me know by coming forward. As together we stand and sing.
I am resolved no longer to linger, charmed by the world's delight.